kick it off, Gary?
Sure, sounds good.
So welcome everybody to, this will be our final Meet the Author for year 2022, won't it?
Yeah.
We got a good turnout too. So thank you everybody for taking the time of your day to come and join this community discussion. So I'm just going to throw it right over to you, Gary, like I like to do. And who do we have today and what are we doing?
Well, I'm really pleased today to welcome David Provan to the show. Hello, David.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Yes, good evening or early evening for David because it's 3 a.m. in the morning in Melbourne time. So thank you for either going to bed early and getting up I guess getting up later or whatever. But thank you for joining us. What I'm going to be talking about with David and with you also, others, is David's book, A Field Guide to Safety Professional Practice. Now, last month, if you recall, if you were on the show, we discussed the state of the EH&S profession with Chance Roberts and his beginner's guide. One of the topics that did come up was education. Education was a major component. And notice that Provan's reference books were written in the late 90s and early 2000s. As a result, education and the latest concepts like safety two, safety differently, HOP, or even a grounding in safety science are glaringly missing. Well, if there is a book that ought to be included in a list of references, I definitely would vote for the one that we're going to talk about today. This is a chef's book, not a book for recipe followers. It's a book that makes you think and not blindly follow. So David, let me get right into it. Let me ask you, what made you decide to write this book?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Thanks everyone for coming along. So I guess, I've been a safety professional for my entire career. I studied it straight out of school and then straight out of college or university. I went, got my first safety job at 19 and it's the only work I've ever done. And I started working closely with Sydney Decker in about 12 years ago. And then I became really curious about what the role of a safety professional could most effectively be inside an organization. And that led on to doing a PhD with Sydney and Dr. Drew Ray, and looking at, the title of my PhD research was, what is the role of a safety professional? And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I live in Melbourne in Australia, and infamously one of the longest lockdowns in the world during COVID. So in 2020, I didn't have a whole lot to do, which finally gave me the opportunity to sit down and write this book, which had long been a project of mine that had never quite got off the ground.
Cool. That's cool. All right. Well, the book itself, it's divided into 5 parts or building blocks for an effective safety professional practice. You begin, though, with a chapter on safety science and theories. Why is this important?
Look, I think, there's a lot of pop psychology in the safety space and a lot of different ideas that are floating around the mix. And then there's this sort of growing empirical basis around safety in the safety science literature. And what I thought was really important for safety professionals is to understand the context of their role. I think in business, we say sometimes that cash is king. So speak to your CFO and they'll sort of say cash is king. And I think in safety or any operational aspect of an organization, context is king. And so what I wanted to do and start off this book is just with a sort of a grounding in the last 100 years of management science and safety science, because often in organizations, people will talk about Taylorism or behavioral safety or Heinrich or all of these ideas in safety without necessarily understanding what questions those theories were answering, and also how might some of those ideas still be relevant to the questions that business faces today. So that was why I thought that a solid grounding in safety science would be a good place to start.
All right. Okay. Well, you end the chapter with 3 cooking tips. What are they?
Yeah, well, I tried to do this. I really wanted to make the book as practical as it could be. I was sort of inspired. This original book, so studying with Sydney, the original field guide to understanding human error investigations really helped in the early 2000s. It really helped take, I guess, some of the early resilience engineering concepts into more practical application, particularly in that context for people investigating, major accidents. And I wanted this book to do the same thing. I wanted a safety professional to be able to pick it up and go, here's some ideas and concepts. And hey, in every chapter, here are some things that are going to help you do this in your organization. Here's some things that are going to get in your way. And, here's sort of three tips at the end. So when we get to the end of, for example, the safety science section, I sort of say that there's a lot of contradictions in safety science. We need to comply, or we need to empower people with the trusted autonomy to make decisions for their role. So there's contradictions everywhere in safety science. Also sort of talked about the role of a practitioner to make these theories complementary rather than contradictory. So you actually need to figure out what the best combination of these approaches are for your organization. And the third tip is sort of, you actually need to understand where your stakeholders are coming from. What's the mindset and beliefs around safety and operations that your stakeholders have? Because, I think organizations move forward when there's an aligned operating philosophy in the business. So that's an example where we just sort of come to the end of the section and go, here's, if you take nothing away from this section, take these 3 points away.
Right. You mentioned about, or often we hear about this so-called single unifying theory of safety. Is there such a thing?
No, I don't think so. Maybe for a little while in 2018-19, when we were writing, when Drew Ray and I were writing our paper on safety work versus the safety of work, we thought we were starting to round out around not a unifying theory, but a very broad theory of safety management in organizations. But couldn't even get close. Safety is, if we think of safety as an emergent property of work, and work is such a complex undertaking, I think you've got to look at safety as a transdisciplinary science. You've got to think about psychology and management science and institutional theory and anthropology and engineering, and there's just no way of tying it together, I think, in a single way.
Yeah, right. I think this is why the theme of the this conversation is about cooking and not looking for one recipe that works for all. You don't know what ingredients you're going to get when you go into an organization. And some cases you got to use the ingredients that's offered or available, and then make substitutes for that. Okay, right. Well, let's move on to the 5 building blocks in the book, which you lay out, and I see that they're in a very deliberate order. The 5 building blocks are: 1 is creating influence. Number 2 is managing risk. 3 is managing work. 4 is leading change. And the 5th and last is facilitating learning. So out of curiosity, how did you arrive at choosing these topics? And were these obvious no-brainers for you, or did they emerge slowly over time?
No, they did emerge, Gary. When I started, this book started in a training course which we run at Safety Futures, and so the book was sort of like after the training course had been put together. And when I started with that program, the original starting point was the INSPO Global Capability Framework, and I sort of said, wouldn't it be great if we had a training course that was delivering everything in this framework? And then I started to pull it apart and realized that the framework was actually missing a whole bunch of really important things. So I then sort of rounded it out. But the basic building blocks for me go like this. As a safety professional, you don't make the decisions that have the most impact on safety in the business. You influence the decisions and actions of others. So, there's not much point in going any further until people in the organization will actually listen to you. And that's all about relationships and influence and trust and credibility. So, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, Mary Angelou quote. So we have to start with understanding, what does it take in an organization to genuinely have influence over others? And then I guess once people will listen to you in your business, you may as well have them listen to you about the things that can seriously injure or kill people. So that's this managing risk piece. And what does end-to-end operational risk management actually really look like? And what's the role of the safety professional in being both coach and conscience of the organization's risk management process? And then once we, I guess, have got a handle on the really big issues in business, we need to understand how to manage work. And then we need to talk about management systems and prescribing work and dealing with safety clutter and all of these repeatable business processes and practices in our organization. Because at the end of the day, organizations need reliable and dependable role and task performance. So there's always going to be an aspect of prescribing business processes and task procedures. We then move on from there and go, once we've got those building blocks in the business, we need to lead change, because organizations don't want to stand still. I've never met a safety professional who says to me that my organization is perfectly happy with where we are in safety. We have no desire to get any better. In fact, turn up at 10 o'clock, leave at 2, have a long lunch, really just don't do, we don't need any safety improvement. Most businesses that we work with are in a sort of a constant state of safety transformation. So the ability to lead and manage change becomes incredibly important, whether it's implementing an action from an incident investigation or whether it's actually leading the rollout of a global safety program. And then the fifth point there is facilitating learning, which is the day in, day out role of safety professionals to make tomorrow just a little bit better than today and next week a little bit better than this week. So whether it's learning teams or incident investigation or monthly KPIs and performance measurement, what are these processes and practices that safety professionals have to enable their organizations to learn? So that's how I sort of put this. And as much as I don't like sort of these linear approaches to safety, this is how I thought: influence people, get a handle on the big important things that can kill people, put in place useful, reliable business processes and practices, know how to drive material improvement, and enable your business to learn from what it does every day.
Great. Okay. So the training course that you provide, just curious, for the students that do attend, do you find it surprising, not surprising, that when you do talk about creating influence, that's the first time they've heard about it? They never got that during their formal education?
Yeah, look, most people don't think too much about it in their roles. Once we start talking about building relationships and how relationships form amongst humans and how this applies in the context of institutions, and we talk about Edgar Schein's work in humble inquiry and why asking questions is more useful for relationship building and understanding in an organization than providing advice and going around the organization saying things that you already know. And we talk about coaching and how to hold constructive, difficult conversations and provide professional opinions that are different to others. So we talk about all these different communication skills, and people just haven't thought too much about it a lot of times in their role. Often there's a few different reflections people have. One is, oh yeah, I've figured this out over 15 or 20 years and I understand this. And others are like, I've never really thought too much about this at all.
Yeah, interesting. So as you previously mentioned, each chapter ends with useful tips. Just to give viewers a glimpse of what you got in the book, maybe give us 3 or 4 tips you'd like to highlight to create influence? You got any other ones? You gave us a few. Can you give us a few more?
Yeah, look, I guess one of the tips is that, socially constructed power is more important than any amount of formal authority. We'll say that in the building relationship section. So, a lot of times safety people that are struggling with influence in their organization will say, well, if I just reported directly to the CEO, then everything would be fine. It's like, no amount of formal authority is going to really support you to, essentially get anything done in a business. You've got to actually build socially constructed power, which is based more on how you approach your role and how you interact with other people in the business. I guess one of the things around coaching is it's not always right to be right. So, when we're actually working with other people in the business, it should never be about us being right. It should be about actually supporting and helping other people to develop and grow and and find their own way forward. So, it might be more right in a particular context for us to let go of the need to be right. And I guess the last one around our difficult conversation is that having constructive, difficult conversation is a key part of our role that we should be having frequently. And we draw here on a William Wrigley Jr. quote from the late 1920s, where he said in his manufacturing organization at the time that if two people in my same organization always agree, then one of them is unnecessary. And so I really insist with safety professionals that you're a professional. You're there to have a professional opinion. You're actually there to constructively challenge your organization in a way that strengthens your relationships and moves the organization forward, not just being, as Dave Woods would describe, the cold water and the empty gun by just basically just saying no to a whole bunch of stuff that the organization wants to do.
Right. Okay. So your next building block is managing risk. You begin with a shift in risk perception, where you see maybe risk as being defined as a chance or probability, but then you talk about a shift in ISO 31000. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. Gary, but Tamara, you've got your hand up. Is there a question that you want to throw in now?
Well, I don't want to kind of go off of what Gary has for a speaking track, but I did want to have an opportunity to also drill in to what you were talking about, the need not to always be right? Because I think that is a stopper in group dynamics for sure. When somebody starts getting an idea, even though in a professional perspective, they may not be hitting it at 100%, but if they're hitting it at least 10%, kind of, how can you bring people along for the journey,
Yeah, it's a really good point. I guess this idea of it not always being right to be right, and there's not necessarily there's rarely likely to be one right and one truth. I think in the fog and the haze of operations and safety, you've just got to sort of just work in a general direction would be my view, and make sure that as much as you can, you bring everyone along with you. So, I think it's at any point in time when the safety person thinks they're right, there's other people in the organization who also think they're right. And just sort of like duking it out is not necessarily a useful way to strengthen your relationship and build alignment. So I sort of, when one of the sayings I say to people a lot in safety is, you have a mindset of replacing extreme judgment with extreme curiosity. So when you get to the point and go, I can't believe you think like that. Replace that model in your mind with, wow, gee, that's not how I think about this issue. You must have a completely different lens over this business than me. I really want to understand, why you think like that, because it's going to help me see something that I'm missing. So I think, Tamara, that's sort of how I think about that. Extreme curiosity when anyone thinks differently to you.
Philip, looks like you had a question there.
Oh, I was just going to also say it also opens up opportunity for us to be now seeing the world through different lenses.
Absolutely. And we know in complexity science that, one of the limitations of an individual perspective is exactly that. We've only got a single lens into the system from where we're standing and where we're looking, and other people see the same system quite differently from where they're standing and how they're looking.
Yeah, I see that Philip is asking, and it goes back to creating influence. Can a safety professional change anything without having a transformational management team?
Well, I think absolutely. I think, never underestimate the power of individuals in small groups. There's another cool saying that, if you think that a small group of people can't change anything, in fact, throughout human history, it's the only thing that ever has. I think you think about, individuals in small groups that have decided to push in a different direction. And I think as safety professionals, often to me, safety professionals will say, look, I'm really frustrated in my business. I need the business to change to make my job easier. And I say, business is never going to roll out the red carpet and worry about how their safety professional team is feeling and feeling supported. The safety professional team has to take ownership for, changing their own course within an organization, and through changing their own course, changing the course of the business. And it's this idea of moving one conversation at a time. So I totally believe that a safety professional, through just the things that they do and the way that they talk about safety, can change an organization's safety narrative and can have the business thinking in a different way about safety. It may not be fast, but it will change if the safety organization changes what it's doing.
I see Phil has unmiked. Did he want to add something?
No, I thanks, David. No, I think your last comment was the bit that really is not something you can expect overnight, and it may take several years to actually change for the organization to change. That may in fact eventually be subject to a leadership change, because if your safety is not working, then it's an indication that everything's not, or many things are not working.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna move on now to the next building block, managing risk.
Yep.
And as I kind of mentioned, there's a shift in risk perception, and where we've shifted now to an ISO 31000. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, briefly, I guess, for a long time we've thought of risk as, like you said there, Gary, a chance of a probability of a loss. And this comes a lot out of the insurance industry and actuarials and thinking about, what's the likelihood of this going wrong and how much are we going to have to pay? And then in, I think, 2009, ISO 31000 said, no, risk should be more about the effect of uncertainty on our business objectives. And so then we need to think more about uncertainty and as opposed to absolute risk. What are the things that we don't know about in our organization, or maybe we don't know well enough to be confident of the way we're controlling them? And in a number of operations, utilities is a good one, where, in Australia, for example, high voltage live line work, which is working at like 110,000 volts or something. There hasn't been a fatality in high voltage work in over a decade, but there's multiple fatalities every year in low voltage work. So the question around risk maybe isn't about absolute risk. Maybe, it's about other factors that contribute there. So, what we do in these chapters of the book is do a real end-to-end operational risk management process, which people on this call might understand more if you're in the process industries, like, process safety management or risk engineering. We actually step right through, some fairly detailed risk management concepts and applications, because we also find that safety professionals generally have a very superficial understanding of risk management. Everyone can plot a risk on a risk matrix with likelihood and consequence, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if we talk about risk management process, should more about hazard control and risk assessment, what should a safety professional be concentrating on?
So I guess it's about, I mentioned earlier about, in risk, about the role of coaching and being a coach and a conscience for the risk management process. So we sort of talk the end-to-end process as being understand the work, understand the hazards associated with the work, understand what can cause those hazards to lead to, the risk consequences, understand what controls you've got that line up with each of those causes. So, whether you think about a bow tie model or something, understand the defeating factors of those particular controls. So what can cause those controls to fail? And then what activities and checks you need to perform to make sure that those controls will be functional, available, and reliable. And so that's sort of gets us from a risk identification, understanding kind of level all the way through to what do I need to do in my organization day in, day out to ensure the quality and reliability and availability of my controls.
Yeah, I can see there's a shift where risk management seems to be more of a people process much more than a technical process.
Yeah, and look, this is a bit. I mean, I'm sure on the call here, this is a bit controversial. I made a quote in a paper that I wrote in 2017 that safety is not a standard to be achieved; it's a point of consensus amongst stakeholders. And this idea we've had in safety that there's a compliance, there's this black line compliance threshold that once we cross this compliance threshold, we're all of a sudden safe, and everything we do in safety is about meeting a standard. And you know, my thoughts around the complexity of safety is we shouldn't see it as a standard to be achieved. We should actually see it as this point of consensus amongst a diverse group of interested parties. So if we get to the point that because sometimes we tell workers that no, we're compliant, so it's safe, even if our workforce thinks something's unsafe. Or I actually think this should be more about, if you take the technical specialist, the safety person, the frontline workforce, the management, if any one of those parties thinks that there's more to do, then there's more to do, at least more to discuss, regardless of whether we think we're compliant or not compliant.
Okay. So now we're comfortable. I can see the connection now. We're comfortable influencing people. We have a solid handle on the risk control environment. So what's next? Building block 3, managing work.
Yeah, so managing work and organizations, I guess, always want to standardize, proceduralize, and have some confidence that the work is going to be executed in the way that the organization plans for that work to be executed. And this is really important because, you know, if you don't understand how work's being carried out, then it's very hard to manage it. It's very hard to resource it. It's very hard to provide the equipment and the training and the support and the interdependencies in the organization. So we want to have procedural control over work. Now that, you know, today in 2022, sometimes in safety is seen to be a very naughty concept, you know, this idea of procedural control over work, but it's a reality, it's a necessity. So we actually talk to I guess this book talks to how to do that in a constructive way in organizations. You know, what is the level of control? How we think about, you know, some of Andrew Hale's work around, you know, rules and actions and states and how that comes together. And then some social science theory around the balancing sort of compliance and autonomy. And then some recently I saw Jim Moranis on the call, I think came in earlier, and we talk about critical steps as well, about how to understand the really important things where, you know, the blue line and the black line needs to be at the same point in a particular task. So yeah, and then I think that's helps liberate people who have been in this tension of there's this school of thought that says burn the house down when it comes to procedures and management systems in the business, which is both not smart and not a helpful way to think about managing safety.
Yeah, so I think most of the viewers on here probably know that, but just in case we have some who don't, the black line is what we call work as imagined, and the blue line is what we call work as done. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think the most popular conceptualization of work as imagined work is done is this black line, blue line model, where you've got a fixed black line, which is the way that work procedures and management and maybe the safety team prescribe and conceptualize the way that work happens. And then you've got this blue line, which is a very dynamic, adaptive, context-dependent reality of work. And at times that blue line and black line might be the same, and more often than not, there's likely to be a deviation. Now, what safety people have to understand is that deviation of work as done just normal and okay performance variability of the work? Is it innovation and improvement, or is it sort of this drift into failure, or this drift of work over time? And this is, I guess, the role of a safety team to understand that gap between work as imagined, work as done, and what it means for risk and safety in the organization.
Yeah, right. I do like a chapter that you've got in under managing work, because there is this tendency that if rules are good, more rules are gooder. And of course, we start to overwhelm people with too many. So this topic on safety clutter, I thought was very, very apropos. And I know you in concert with Jude Ray have produced a lot of video lectures, articles, and provided us resources on the topic. Can you explain what is safety clutter?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Look, I think this follows an idea that, you know, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I think that's true of safety and work procedures. So, you know, safety clutter we defined as the accumulation and persistence of safety roles, practices, activities in an organization that doesn't add any value to operational safety. So I guess we've got a largely North American audience. A term I learned during COVID, which I love, is pencil whipping. So in this part of the world, we call it box ticking, but I much prefer your term. You know, it's these things that we do in an organization with the primary objective of enhancing, improving safety. And one that, you know, maybe we know and others know in the business isn't actually adding any useful value to operational risk. So, you know, we've talked about it for a couple of years now, since we coined that term and published it in 2018. And organizations say, yes, we've got it. And still we find organizations struggle for a whole bunch of reasons to do much about it. So that's what we talk about in this chapter. We're trying to help people understand that it's there, and that our role as safety professional needs to be, ideally needs to be, sit back and go, what are all the safety processes and practices we've got in our business, from inductions to inspections to investigations to audits, to training programs? What are all these things that we've got for safety in our business? And what is the current kind of fidelity and quality of those activities in the business? And where we discover that one of those processes or practices is not delivering on its intent, then, you know, we should act. We need to act. You know, we need to do something about it. You know, the number of safety professionals and safety teams I sit with that go, oh yeah, this is admin, this is broken, and I'm like, well, like it's your process, your practice. You should consider yourself the process owner of it. And if that's how you feel, like, do something quickly with it.
Yeah, I did characterize your book as a chef's book, because you got to first think about the ingredients you're going to add together and the potential outcome of mixing them together. But you do have recipes in the book, and I think they're very useful. For example, can you just talk about the 3 C's of safety clutter and when this recipe might be used?
Yeah, well, we sort of in the original paper on safety clutter, we wanted to help people sort of both conceptualize it, but also practically try to identify and do something about clutter in their business. So we talked about, with every safety practice in the business, there's these 3 C's: contribution, confidence, consensus. So, you know, we need to think about each safety process and practice in our business. What is the contribution that this has to safety? So whether it's an induction process, a risk assessment process, whatever it is, a leadership visit, whatever that is, an audit. What is the potential contribution of this activity to safety? How does this actually work? If this process or practice around safety is delivering on its intent, how does that actually happen? So, you know, and this isn't rocket science or complicated. It's like, if I'm doing a safety induction, what I'm actually trying to do is induct someone into my workplace. I'm trying to make them understand the hazards and risks of this workplace, the control environment, you know, a whole bunch of things. So then the second one is confidence. So, you know, to what degree of confidence do we have that process or practice is delivering on that contribution? You know, how do we know? Do we just believe that happens? You know, we run inductions and it works. Do we have any data or feedback or insight that we're actually, you know, realizing that contribution of that process? And then there's a consensus. What does everyone think? So, you know, the manager, the worker, the safety person, the senior leader, you know, and particularly when we think about, you know, audits as an example, you know, is everyone on the same page? So management might think that audits are great. We get a whole lot of confidence and understanding. And, you know, your frontline leaders might think audits are a complete waste of time. I never learn anything new about my business during an audit. And the safety team might think that, oh, gee, you know, for the sake of 4 weeks we spend in this audit, we really don't contribute a whole lot. So what we wanted to do with this 3C framework is provide people some language and process to start talking about the relative efficacy of the different safety practices they've got.
Yeah. Tanya, you've got a good question about, can you prevent consensus from being groupthink? Do you want to open your mic and talk about that?
Well, I mean, I just asked the question because I know that a lot of organizations like the idea of consensus building, and we're all here together, but that the influence, I mean, I know that David knows this stuff. Like if the leader weighs in first, then consensus isn't going to be obtained because everybody is going to be socially normed into, well, if that's the way I should be thinking, then that's the, I will just agree with them, even though it's not their genuine opinion. And it's tricky. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Nice to see you again. I think with that, you're absolutely right. So we talk a lot currently, which is great, around psychological safety and what that means, whether people are actually saying what they really think. I think in this point around safety clutter, we talked about the people who are the owners of the business of the process, the people who are executing the process and practice, and the people who are supposedly being made safe by the process and practice and these different stakeholder groups. And I think that comes down to the skill and ability of a safety professional to be able to seek out, insights and opinions of people, whether that's in a group conversation, but maybe in an individual interaction. So being mindful, knowledgeable about groupthink, bias, and these other things, the role of power. I really like Charles Perrow's quote that, power is an issue in safety more important than culture. And I think in institutions, power is very much something that is not discussed enough in safety science or management science, which goes to your point, Tanya, about groupthink and just parroting what the manager says. So I think that's where the skill of the safety professional, the knowledge and skill of the safety professional in getting to the genuine ideas and opinions of people throughout the business.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in your fourth building block, you say it's time to go strategic in terms of leading change. So what do you mean by that?
Well, this idea, I guess, Gary, this as safety professionals, where I think at the core of our role, we're change leaders, change facilitators, change managers. Pretty much everything we do in our role has an element of change associated with it. Whether we're trying to sort of shape the mindset and beliefs of others through conversation, like I said earlier, whether we're trying to implement actions out of an incident investigation or an audit, whether we're trying to lead a safety improvement program or put in place a new process or practice in the business. A significant amount of everything we do as safety professionals is about change. And I guess this is another core capability that, if you look at a normal safety professional development program or curriculum, you might not see, too much about change management or change leadership. So what we do in this part of the book is really help people understand change, top down change, how management consultants, approach this, Michael Porter's, 8-step change process and what this looks like as top-down change. What we know about, I guess, more bottom-up change, starting with Kurt Lewin's work in the 1940s with the Harwood experiments and how we think about some modern approaches to change through behavioral economics, like nudge theory and things like that. But the central theme to this section of the book is really that organizations don't change, people do. And in organizations, change needs to be done with people, not to people. If we want genuine, ownership and alignment and movement, then it needs to be done with people, not to people.
Yeah, I think it's great how you treat strategic organization-wide change, such as implementing a global transformation from an ecological perspective, because this really aligns with what Carsten Bush said about 2 shows ago about organizations being complex adaptive systems. and how he believes, and I think you already mentioned it, that culture sometimes emerges from the system and evolves towards a certain future. And you mentioned nudge theory as well. So I think not too many people maybe understand what nudge theory is. So can you give us a bit of an introduction to that?
Yeah, I guess, and I know, Gary, you know a lot more about this than I do. One of the things about trying to write a very general book is you probe into areas and then you realize that these are whole fields and disciplines, and you very quickly feel very inadequate about your understanding of these areas. But I guess nudge theory, I guess it's for me about how do you shape the conditions in an organization such that you are shaping the decisions and actions of others, you know, to align with the way that you would hope that people would make decisions and act, you know. And if you think about, you know, a local government or a city, or I think you'd call them the city departments in the Americas, you know, there's often nudge departments where they're looking at how do I design the community spaces in my city such that people want to come out and spend time in them. How do I need to think about the shape and things like that? Or so it's this idea in nudge theory, and I think it's important in safety and in organizational life generally, is, you know, how do we shape the conditions in the organization in a way that provides nudges to people to decide and act in ways that we would like them to decide and act. Now, some people might say, you know, that's a whole lot of manipulation. And I'd say, well, yeah, like marketing is a whole bunch of manipulation. Like there's $1 trillion marketing industry that's trying to get us to buy things that we don't know we need until we see the advertisement or that. And I think, you know, organizations should be authentic and genuine. And at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with organizations going, rather than telling people what we want them to do, how can we shape the environment and the conditions in the organization that make it easy and sensible for them to decide and act in a certain way? Yeah.
We look at different degrees of nudging, because sometimes nudging turns into you're going to yank somebody over there, or you're gonna have to pull somebody there, or sometimes you have to smack somebody over there. Well, we're not talking about that form of influence here. We're talking about real nudging, where people actually do have a choice to say yay or nay, right? And then it's up to us, I think, is create the conditions to make it easy for them to go there and make it attractive as well. Okay, right. Any other thoughts from the folks up there? Any questions, ideas? Okay. Jeremy, you've got a question? You want to come on mic and talk about that?
Yeah, I guess, David, my question is, how do you differentiate, you know, safety related change efforts versus all the other change things that go on in our organizations, right? And there could be 1,000 of those things going on at one time. How would you differentiate what we do versus those other ones?
Yeah, Jeremy, it's a good question. And in some ways, I'd say that they're not different from any other change effort in an organization. And then at the same time, I'd say maybe they are a little bit. And why I think they might be a little bit different is because we're actually shaping work, deep in the operation of the business. And many other change efforts don't really need to penetrate their organization that far. You know, if you're implementing, something to do with finance, it might just affect, some of the finance team, or it might just be a sort of more of a compartmentalized change type of process or activity. Whereas when we're thinking about a lot of the things we do in safety, we're actually trying to make change sort of in all pockets of our business with all people in our business, which makes it a much more extensive undertaking and a much more operational undertaking as well. So I think just thinking about it now, I think a lot more thought needs to go into our safety related change efforts than we might currently be putting into them.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Mike.
I think just before we leave this talk about nudge, I think maybe
Sorry,
some
Gary,
of you.
I think Mike's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay, no problem.
But yeah, David, I love the book. I'm an academic at East Carolina University, and we're going to use the book in our professional practice class coming up in January. And so, I'm really happy that you wrote this book, and this is a great forum here. Gary, thank you so much. So it's interesting, when I read the book the first time, David, I was a little bit shocked that there were no references in the book. And I was kind of like, oh, wow, from an academic standpoint, from a student learning standpoint. But then as I reflected on it, I actually think it's quite brilliant. And I think, well, I'd like to know from you, I guess, before I kind of say why I think it's so brilliant. Why did you write the book in that particular manner? What was your vision? That would be really interesting to know.
Yeah. And Mike, I guess in some of the chapters, I think up front, I'm hopefully fairly clear where I've drawn, like in the humble inquiry chapter, I just say, look, this is basically a 2,000 word synthesis of Edgar Schein's 2009 book on humble inquiry, or the safety science section. I say, look, this is a synthesis of Sydney Decker's Foundations of Safety Science textbook, and definitely chapters. There's much smarter people than me that have written extensively about these issues. And then there's sections of the different chapters, whether it's just cultures or borrowing from just culture, or borrowing from frameworks around how to have difficult conversations in business. But the style of writing, I wanted to be more accessible. Like if you look at some of that heavily referenced academic work, is this concept of this field guide, I wanted to be able to put it in the hands of a safety advisor who's working, in a manufacturing plant, who maybe has done a CSP exam, but hasn't been to university, and wants something that they can read. So I wanted it to be accessible, and also the way that I wrote it, Mike, it was quite cathartic. I actually just unloaded what was in my head, both a combination of what's the theory around this, and also what's been my two decades of lived experience inside organizations as a safety professional, trying to think about how would I make this work. So a lot of it was really just blank page, just COVID lockdown, just punching away at the keyboard. So I think, Mike, to answer your question, it was more what I hope the book would be, the style of writing. But I obviously, anything that I know has been learnt through standing on the shoulders of absolute giants in this discipline. So there's likely to be very little in that book that's a new idea of mine. And Mike, like I said, I'd love to come and talk to your class as well when you're running the course.
Oh, we would love to have you. And I think, I really like the style of writing because, I would read something and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I know where that comes from. Where did that come from? And then it caused me to then go back and read something else and delve into that a little bit more. And I think those are going to be great discussions to have with students and the practitioners, and to talk about those things. Like, oh yeah, where did he get that from? Yeah, let's go back and delve into that. So I think it was a brilliant way to kind of do that. So thank you so much. Yeah.
No, thanks, Mike.
And I'm going to take you up on your offer.
Yeah, very kind. Thank you.
I had one of those situations too, Mike, where I had a bit of an aha, because as I'm going through David's book there, it made me recall last October, and me, the author, we had Robert DeBoer come on and speak about conducting micro experiments in a complex environment where outcomes cannot be predicted. So the aha was me, is that really a nudge, essentially just a micro experiment. So it's really neat how these kind of like connecting the dots occur. And you can see how they just thread through each other, and this everything starts to slowly come together. Just watching the clock, there's a lot of stuff that David's got in Leading Change, but I want to leave time now to move on to the last block, which is facilitate learning. And this is something very interesting, because when I looked at one of the chapters, it's incident investigation. So what I did, I Googled an OSH website and I read the purpose of an incident investigation. And what does it say? It says to find out the cause, prevent similar future incidents, fulfill legal requirements, determine the cost, determine regulation compliance, and process workers' compensation claims. Not a word about learning. And it kind of bothers me. So you have a different view of what success should look like, David. Can you share that?
Yeah, and I guess it's a good point, Gary. And I mean, all those things are, I guess, necessary, but maybe most of the time not that useful. I think when we think about incident investigation, there's definitely a risk assurance aspect of incident investigation, which is, was there something specific that happened here that exists in the rest of my operations, and do I need to do something about it? So, this particular piece of equipment failed, and I want to go and check that piece of equipment at other sites and things like that. So there's always a risk assurance aspect of investigations, and then there's this learning aspect, and we talk a lot about learning in organizations and wanting to be a learning organization, and we sort of rarely put the conditions in place that actually enable learning to occur. So in this chapter in the book, it's really talking about just culture and psychological safety and the role of the investigation to actually get a deeper insight and understanding of the way that our organization functions, and what are the, you might say, the performance shaping factors, or what are the logics and conditions that and context that contributes to the way that work is carried out. And some people would say that, there's no point investigating because a complex system is always changing, and the system as it existed at the time of the incident is not the same system that it is today. That's all well and good, but organizations aren't going to stop investigating incidents anytime soon. So you may as well make them slightly more useful than they are at present. And, when we look at organizations, when I talk to people in organizations, they do lots and lots of incident investigations, which results in lots and lots of procedure updates, training courses, and safety alerts in their business, and not a whole lot of learning. So that's what we're trying to do here. Not teach people in this chapter how to investigate an incident, but what are the conditions that you need to have around an incident investigation to actually learn. Yeah.
I think this is where that black line, blue line model comes in really handy. I know I use that because there's this other third, somewhat hidden line called the accident line. And quite often in an accident investigation, that's where we investigate, where the black line and the accident line meet. And from that's where we get the counterfactuals, as we call them. And then things go way off, and that's where the blaming comes in and everything else, where I think we got to move and look at the differences between the black and the blue lines. That's a gap, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where the real learning is, between the black and the blue line.
Yeah, I agree, Gary. And also between the blue line and the hazard line, like you said, like what is the safe operating envelope around just normal performance variability of role and task. So there's always a lot to learn.
Yeah, right, okay. Anybody got a comment out there they'd like to make in the audience? I see there's, tomorrow we're getting lots of good chat out there, aren't we? Okay. Just checking here, okay. Tanya, you seem to be putting a lot of cool stuff on here. Could you just maybe talk to me about that? That's pretty good.
I'm not even sure if I'm able to talk about it yet, Gary, because it's fairly new to me, but a lot of what I believe our understanding of human behavior stems from are some experiments that were done soon after the Second World War and, in the early 70s. And, this blind obedience to power kind of understanding of how people will react, the Ash experiment, on and on and on. There has been, actually, it's an Australian researcher who has dug into the archives of the Milgram experiment and found that Milgram didn't really find what we all think he did. And I think it's amazing and frightening at the same time. And I haven't really processed it yet, but I put the YouTube he did in the chat. I also put the Australian podcast that I learned this from in the chat. And I think it's really important for us to realize that some of maybe the foundational assumptions that we have on human behavior might not be as solid as we think they are. Ergo, everything else that comes from that, we might have to really start questioning. That's all I'm, it's kind of a big deal.
Good. Good. Okay. Just make a comment. I see Jim Marinus is with us, and as I was going through David's book, his first chapter under facilitated learning is understanding work, and of course that made me think of critical steps. So there's another connection with another book to David's book here. So David, in some cases, I'm finding your book could be a bit of a hub for all these various shows that we've had on for the past couple of years. So I find that really fascinating. Okay. I see there's a comment there from, was it Philip? Oh, Paul. Paul, you got a comment there? Question?
There's one from Philip and one from Paul.
Okay, why don't you go ahead? Go ahead, Philip. Sounds like you're first.
Yeah, so it's just a question to David. We're talking a bit about the black line and the blue line. I've not read the book, and I'm just questioning whether you discuss the subject of learning from everyday work, normal everyday work in there.
Yeah,
a specific subject.
Yeah, it's a good point, Philip. And I guess there's the understanding work chapter in the book is about learning from everyday work, and really talks about I guess learning about the blue line and how to go about doing that. What different types of insights processes you can have in your business to do that, the descriptive processes and normative processes. And I think it's just a really nuanced view on what companies think that they're doing when they say we've got planned task observations or other types of activity which is meant to be doing that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, David. Yeah. Just my question was just in relation to, I suppose, technical skills versus the critical people skills. We've kind of focused a bit more on the critical people skills in the last while, and it's probably no harm really. But what are your? I hadn't a question there, a ratio, for new people coming into the industry, or do you see a balance there, or one way or the other?
Look, it's this might be somewhat controversial because it's probably counter to safety professional development curriculum for the last 2 decades. But if you've asked me for a ratio, I'd say 10%, 90%, 10% technical skills, 90% critical people skills. I think I don't focus at them too much in this book because most people have done an auditing course, an incident investigation course, a hazard management course. They might understand some of the technical aspects. And also there's typically in any of those technical aspects as a safety professional, there's likely to be someone in your organization who has more deep technical knowledge on that issue than you do anyway. So your ability to ask good questions is always going to trump any sort of technical capability that you're bringing in relation to work or hazards. So I think it's good to an extent, Paul, to have enough technical understanding that you can ask good questions and draw people in. So, I still think industry context is really important. So, understanding the language and the business processes in the industry that you're trying to support. But I also think it's potentially less helpful if the safety person already thinks they know the answer. So I don't know if that helps, Paul, but yeah, I always hesitate to give a really specific answer. But if you ask the question, I'm happy to have a crack at it.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Thanks. I'm getting closer to the 1090 myself. Maybe not quite there yet, but closer.
We're at the top of the hour, so I just want to leave one more question and maybe call on your experience, David, traveling around the world. Do you find all the stuff that's in your book totally applicable for different cultures, whether it's south, east, north, west?
Yeah, so because we didn't talk specifically about regulation or anything like that, we've had more than, in the training program which this book is based on, we've had more than 500 safety professionals in the last 2 years. Mines in all corners of Africa, Mauritania, Angola, Nigeria, South Africa. We've had people in Canada and the Americas and Mexico and South America and Asia as well. There's a comment in here. There is some different cultural context between Western and Eastern that Fids has mentioned there. It means things like humble inquiry and the role of hierarchy and power in business is a bit different. So if you think about some of the approaches that we've been talking about today, about consensus building and learning teams, there's a slightly different hierarchical context that you need to understand particularly in Eastern cultures around that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have that mindset, but it means how you actually go about doing that needs to be culturally sensitive. But we do find that, that most of the material in the book resonates with people, all over the world. And in fact, one of the things that I've been most surprised about is how consistent the plight of a safety professional is in all parts of the world. So that's been my experience.
That's great. Thank you. Well, let me close today's session, which is our top of the hour. What's your 3 takeaways that you would like to leave the viewers?
Look, I think we sort of say in the role, and it's not so much in the book, but a safety professional sort of should help an organization answer sort of 3 fundamental necessities. We need to help our organization understand the answer to the question of, are we safe enough? Are we safe enough today? The second question is, what else can we do to reduce risk further in our business? And then the third point or question would be, how can we integrate what we're doing in the delivery of our safety objectives with the delivery of our other business and operational objectives to make sort of our safety management activities additive to the bottom line performance of the business? So I think there's some really fundamental things that a safety professional needs to support their business with. Are we safe enough? What else can we do to reduce risk further? And how do we enhance our organizational and operational performance through the way that we're managing safety?
Oh, great. Well, there's a lot more in the book that we couldn't cover today, and I don't know where the hour went, but we passed it. So we left a lot of meat uncarved, if I can say that. Besides getting the book, I also recommend checking out David's Safety Futures website. And I think tomorrow we'll include a link in that when you publish today's recording on LinkedIn. Okay.
Absolutely.
So over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you everybody for joining us, and Gary again for hosting and putting this together, and for everybody for coming, because if we didn't have you join us, we wouldn't have these discussions. So this is great. Thank you. And thank you, Dave, for taking time out of your busy day to join us and share your book and share your knowledge and, just kind of lift our thinking up a little bit to a different place. Thank you very much for doing that.
No problems, Tamara. Just for reference, the 3 a.m. till 4 a.m. Saturday morning time slot isn't usually that congested in my schedule.
So we can do this again.
Yeah,
That's
any
what
week,
I'm hearing.
Any week. Absolutely. Any week would be fine.
Wonderful.
I guarantee I'm available.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy
Thanks, everyone.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
So Richard, you had a question, didn't you? Oh, did Richard go?
Yeah, looks like it.
Oh, okay.
All right.
He had a question.
Oh, it's okay. Let's see. All right.
Wow, that was good. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah, worked out well. That's good.
You're always
Okay.
right, Gary. The hour does go fast.
It does, and as you know, I prepare these prompt questions, and as you say, they're linear questions, but they appear non-linear. We take it as the occasion emerges. This is the right time to ask the question. So looks like there's some flow.
Yeah. No, the prep was really helpful to keep us on track.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
Gary, it sounds like you're coming down with something.
Oh, I'm coming over it.
Oh, are you?
I was
Okay.
a bit worried 2 days ago. I could hardly speak.
Oh,
So
we appreciate it.
I think I've tasted every type of lozenges that they sell in the drugstore to find one that works. So thank God I can relax now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this has been great.
Okay. Yeah. So do you have the link to David's safety futures? Or maybe you can provide that?
Yeah,
I've
just
been-
safetyfeatures.com.
Yeah, it's very straightforward. If not, I can give it to you, but I think you should be able to find it.
Oh, okay, so not the book.
No, it's a link to, and there's a ton of online resources there, which is really good. Which basically supports the program that he has, the online program.
Okay. So, no, I don't have that. Hold on. What is it again?
Do you have
Can we
that?
put it
David?
in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah, put it in the chat and then safety what?
Safetyfutures.com, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just safetyfutures.com. It's just the course programs, or just LinkedIn Safety Futures. There's a Safety Futures page on LinkedIn as well.
And it's all blue?
Blue.
Yeah, it's all blue. It is all blue.
Okay, there, I put that there. So that
there
we
you go.
can, so at least I have it. Yeah,
Yeah, you got it. That's cool. Great.
yeah. So that I can put that in the follow-up email, right?
Yeah, follow-up email, and even if you want to post that as part of the comments in the YouTube video, that'd be good as well. Because we have a lot of people that unfortunately can't attend, but they'll watch the YouTube later. So it'd be nice to have that as
Great.
well.
Yeah.
Cool.
yeah.
And then I can share that link as well.
Yeah.
And the
yeah,
LinkedIn too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah. Everything. Yeah. And we just broadcast it everywhere. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks again,
Awesome.
David.
Thank
problem.
you.
Have a
This
great
is
weekend. Have a
great.
great Christmas, great holidays, and well
Yeah.
done for what you're doing in the community. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a good time. Great, guys.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Tamara.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.